G'day boys, how's it going? Today I got something real special to show you. So if you're anything like me, there's no way in hell that you are ever going to use Google Drive, OneDrive, Apple iCloud just off of privacy concerns alone. I mean, the cloud, if you think about it, it's literally just somebody else's computer. So instead of storing the stuff on your computer, you're giving it to Microsoft, you're giving it to Apple, you're giving it to Google, whoever the hell. It'd be like if Jono down the road, he's just bought a terabyte of storage and you're running a bit low, so you say, you go over to his house and you say, "G'day mate, I got something for you," and you hand him 80 gigabytes of photos. And then Jono, he might be an upstanding bloke, he might not look at your photos, but you replace Jono with a multinational corporation that makes billions of dollars off of selling user data and information. Gets a bit dicey, boys. It gets a bit dicey. So I was never going to use anything like that, and if you're anything like me, you weren't going to use it either. But I can't help but feel a bit jealous of some of my friends when I look at their computers when they're doing stuff and they're pulling stuff from OneDrive and they're syncing stuff up to the cloud. They're making it, so they've got backups of everything, and it's a nice, from a purely technological standpoint, it is a pretty cool piece of technology. But we don't have to be jealous anymore, boys, because I've got something real cool to show you. SSHFS. It's a file system mounted over SSH so that you can take back control of your own stuff, because if the cloud is just somebody else's computer, why can't the cloud be on your computer? So today we're going to dive into that. I'm going to show you how to set it up. I'm going to show you the server side, the client side. Speaking of which, before we jump in, there are a few requirements that you're going to need. So you're going to need somewhere like a computer to host your files for you. Now this can be any computer you like that is capable of running SSH. It can be a server, like a home server if you've got one. That's what I'll be demoing it on. It can be a VPS. It can be if you just leave your desktop computer running when you're going out. It can be whatever you want. It could be a Raspberry Pi if you're happy with SD card storage. It can be anything that runs SSH is fine. So that's the one requirement of this, is you're going to need a computer to store the files on. So we're going to go ahead and jump on into the server side. I'll pop on over to desktop and I'll show you around. Alright, so we're over here on the desktop, and the first thing that we want to be go ahead and doing is setting up the server side. On the server side, there are two things that we need to set up. So the first is we need to enable public key authentication if we haven't already. And the reason for this is we want to be able to mount and unmount our file system without requiring a password. Because eventually the goal with this is that we set up a NetworkManager script that whenever it brings your connection up, it'll mount the file system. Whenever your connection goes down, it'll unmount the file system. And to be able to do that cleanly, we got to be able to do that without having to enter a password each time. And the second thing we got to do is just make a folder that's going to store all of our cloud files in it. So first thing you want to do is go ahead and log into your server. I'm going to log into mine like so. This is my FreeBSD home server. You can log into your VPS, Raspberry Pi server, whatever. Just SSH into it. And if you haven't already, we want to edit our SSH config file and enable public key authentication. So on FreeBSD, this is the path. Might be different for you depending on the distribution you're running. But wherever it is, go ahead and open it up. And the line that we're looking for is pub key authentication. Now, for most people, if you haven't done this already, it'll be set to no. All you got to do is edit the file, change it to yes, and then go ahead and save the file. So mine's already set to yes. You just go ahead and write the file when you've saved it to yes. And that's SSH setup. After you do that, you just want to restart SSHD. On most Linux distributions, the command you want to be running is sudo systemctl restart SSHD. If you're running FreeBSD like me, on the off chance, it would be sudo service SSHD restart. My SSHD has already got pub key authentication set to yes, so I'm not going to bother. Once you've done that, all that's left to do is make a directory for storing all your cloud storage in. So if you haven't done that already, all you have to do, make a directory, mkdir, cloud directory. My directory is pools zlibrary library private. It can be any folder on your file system, just as long as you take note of the path that it's going to. One thing I will say is that it gets a little bit awkward if there are spaces in the file path, so personally I wouldn't, just the syntax of the bash command to mount it. So just use a dash instead. Don't use a space. It'll make your life a lot easier. So just take note of the folder, and then when you've done that, you can go ahead and exit out of the server side. Now on the client side, there's a lot more to set up. So the first thing we've got to do, if you haven't already, is create an SSH key. So we've just allowed key authentication on our server. On our client, we've got to generate a key if you haven't already. So the command to do that is SSH keygen. And if you run that, it'll generate a pair for you. The defaults for this are fine. It's gonna ask you for a passphrase. Just leave it as blank. Otherwise, you'll again have to enter your password every time you want to do it. I've already got a key pair, so I'm not going to go through this command. Otherwise, it'll overwrite my key. But it's fairly simple. Just follow the prompts, and it'll generate one for you. Then when you've done that, you just have to copy the key over to your server. And the command for that is SSH copy ID. Specify the port to copy it over. If you haven't changed your server port, you don't have to bother with this. If you're running on port 22, I'm running on port 9109. So I'm going to enter that right here. And then you just specify your server address. So just like so. And it'll go ahead and do it. I've already installed my keys, but when you go ahead and copy yours over, it'll prompt you for a password and then enter it, and it'll be copied over just fine. And you can test whether or not your SSH keys are copied over properly by just if you're able to log into your server without a password. So once that's done, we need to install SSHFS on our desktop computer if we haven't already, or sorry, I shouldn't say desktop, I should say laptop or whatever computer, the client computer. On most distributions, this is installed already by default, but if it isn't, you can find it in your distros repositories. So here, I'm on Artix. You can see it there in the Galaxy repository. So if you're on Arch or an Arch-based distro, that would be the command you'd run to install SSHFS. But it is installed by default on most distributions. Just check to make sure. Once that's done, we need to make an edit to our fuse configuration file. So SSHFS is mounted using fuse. Fuse is used for a lot of things like NTFS, exFAT I think uses fuse. Like, it's a very common file system, subsystem. So we got to go ahead and edit our fuse config. Usually it's etsy/fuse.conf. And go ahead and edit the file. If I can get my password right, that would be fantastic. And all you've got to do, this will be commented out by default. All you have to do is uncomment it, user allow other. Essentially, all this lets us do is that if we mount this file system as root, it's just going to let other users access and modify files on that file system. And we definitely want that. So we've got to enable user allow other. Write the file. You don't have to restart anything. It'll just update by itself. And there you go. So on the client side, we need to make a directory for mounting our remote file system on. So in my home directory, I have a folder called RFS. And inside that folder called RFS, I have this library folder here. And this is my mount point. Your mount point can be anywhere. It doesn't matter as long as you've got the path written down somewhere. You could just make a directory and call it cloud local if you wanted to. Just note down the path and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is make a NetworkManager dispatcher script. If you're not familiar, NetworkManager is the part of your Linux distribution which handles internet connections. So whenever your Wi-Fi connection is brought up or brought down, or your Ethernet connection is brought up or down, or a VPN connection, if you can even configure VPNs through NetworkManager. All of that stuff is handled with NetworkManager, and it's got this great feature called Dispatcher, which lets you essentially just run a script when your internet connectivity changes. So you can run a script when your net goes up, you can run a script when your net goes down, you can run a script when there's any change at all, which is what we're looking to do. So essentially what we want to be doing is mounting the file system when the connection goes up and unmounting it when it goes down, so that we've got a nice clean, obviously if the network connection is disabled, then we're not going to be able to access the files and the server's going to be unresponsive. that can lag up our applications and file system, so we don't want that. So essentially what we're going to do is write a little script that remounts it for us, or tries to remount it when there's a connectivity change. So the NetworkManager's dispatcher scripts are stored in etc NetworkManager dispatcher D, and if you just put one in this folder, it will run anytime there's a connection change. So I've gone ahead and made a script called 30-sshfs.sh. So I'll go ahead and show you what's in there. So pretty standard stuff. Bin/sh tells us we want to run in bin/sh, that's fine. We set up a couple of variables here, which we're going to use to simplify our command. User mdhof, that's my username. You would want to substitute that for your username on your remote system. So for example, if you log into your server with the name Johnny, you would want to put Johnny here. It doesn't matter if your local machine's username is different. You want to put what your remote username's user is, and in my case that's mdhof. Then this remote variable here, this is essentially just your remote server IP address and then the path to the folder as well. So I've got my remote server on matthewhoffman.xyz. You can change that to whatever your domain is, or if you're connecting with an IP address, you would put the IP address in here. And then you can see I've got a colon, and this colon separates the IP address from the file path. And you'd be familiar with this sort of syntax before if you used SCP. SCP, I believe, uses a very similar sort of tokenization where you put the colon after the IP address and then goes to the path. So this is where you're going to put your remote file path. So if you remember from when we were on the server, I told you guys to make note of where your remote cloud files are going to be stored. And in this case, this is, for me, pools, zlibrary, library, private. So I put that after my IP address, after a colon. And then local, this variable here is where locally you want your remote server to be mounted. And in my case, that's home, mdhof, rfs, library. Now, you do want to put the full file path in here. If you put a tilde, because this script is going to run as root, so NetworkManager dispatcher runs all that script as root. If you put a tilde in here, it'll think that's the root users directory, which is not what we want. So you would just put the absolute file path for both local and remote up here. So nextly, I have made this function called remount, and essentially all this does is it unmounts the file system, so it unmounts things on local. The options I have here for umount, -L and -F, they're very important. So -F is used for unmounting an unresponsive file system. Sometimes, if your network connection is going down, SSHFS can become unresponsive. So -F is essentially -force, and it doesn't wait for it to finish up all the stuff it's doing, because sometimes if the network connection is down, it doesn't like doing that. And then -L is a lazy unmount. So what lazy unmount is, I was having some issues getting my computer to go to sleep because it was waiting for NetworkManager to finish running this umount command with an unresponsive file system. Again, it just gets a bit unresponsive for a while. So -L essentially says to the kernel, just remove this from the file system tree. If applications are still using it, wait for those, or not wait, but unmount it when it's ready to be unmounted, but just remove it from the file system tree for the moment. But on the kernel side, it's still there, and it's still technically being accessed, but the user space side of things can just continue operating without a hitch, which is what I wanted. If my computer is going to sleep, I don't want it waiting for a umount command to finish. So then I've got this sleep command here, sleep1. So it'll unmount this file system, it'll wait for 1 second, and then it'll try and mount it again with this command here. And this command here is where our actual SSHFS mount comes in. So the reason I've got this sleep here is if it's reconnecting to, for example, a VPN, my setup, I run a VPN on OpenVPN, which is managed with NetworkManager. So if I disconnect my VPN, it unmounts the file system, waits 1 second for my normal connection to be ready, and then tries to remount it again. So this SSHFS command here is actually what does the mounting for us. So the command is SSHFS -P. If you've got a special port like mine, again, my port for SSH is 9109. If your port is 22 or you've just left it default, you don't have to specify here, but if you've got a custom port, this is where you want to do it. Then I've got -O for options. So there are quite a few options that we want to pass to SSHFS. So the first one is allow other. Again, this is just because we're mounting as root, we want other users on the system to be able to access that directory, including our own user. So we've got this allow other in here. Basically just says let other users read and write files in this directory, not just the mounter. Follow symlinks. This is optional. If you've got symlinks in your thing to outside of that cloud directory, then you'd want this. If not, probably leave it disabled. But I personally do, so I've got follow symlinks in there. And then identity file. So this is very important. Identity file equals, and then the path, absolute path to your SSH keys. So by default, this will be in /home/your username /.ssh/id_RSA. However, when you were running SSH keygen, it did ask you if you wanted to specify a custom location for it. And in that case, if you have specified a custom location for it, just make sure that you write out that custom location in this identity file option, because that's what SSHFS is going to use to try and connect to the remote server. And then finally here, we've got the variables user, @remote, and then space, and then local. So all this is saying is, after our options, we connect to the remote server user, mdhoff, @remote, matthewhoffman.xyz, pool zlibrary private, space, local. So essentially just mount this remote file system to this local directory. And that's the end of the function. So next, the next part of this script is going to be a little bit different depending on how you've got your network set up. So in my case, my network manager setup is that I have an Ethernet connection on my desktop, and I have a VPN connection on top of that. And whenever my wired connection goes up, it automatically connects to my VPN. And whenever my connection goes down, obviously it disconnects the VPN. So if you're running the same setup as me, this little case statement here is necessary, because this script here runs every time any connection at all is changed. So when you bring down your wireless connection, if you've got a VPN connected as well, it'll bring down both your wired connection and your VPN, and this script will be run twice. So in order for me to only try and remount once, if you go ahead and type nmcli connection, you can see all of the connections on your system that are active at the moment or have been active in the past. So I've got ExpressVPN Brisbane, that's my OpenVPN setup. I've got wide connection 1, that's my Ethernet, and ton 0 is like automatically created when ExpressVPN is connected, so I don't really worry about that. If you're on a laptop with Wi-Fi, you'll see a whole bunch of different Wi-Fi connections here. If you're running a VPN with OpenVPN like me, what you want to do is grab the UUID of your VPN from here and copy it into this case statement on this thing. And the reason why I've got this case statement here is that you can essentially, if you really want to, if you want to configure this more, you can add more UUIDs from over here with custom like options and commands and things like that. My setup, I like to keep it simple, so I don't have a use for that, but I put the case statement in there so I can extend it if I need to in future. However, if you are not running a VPN, you can literally just get rid of this case statement. So if you're just running a standard connection where it brings up your Wi-Fi, it brings down your Wi-Fi, it brings up your Ethernet, it brings down your Ethernet, and you don't have to worry about this script being run twice, which is the reason why I've got this case statement in here, you can literally just have remount like that and it'll work fine. So consider the cases here. So if you don't have a VPN on and you've just got a wireless connection, for example, if you bring that up, it'll run this script, and remount first tries to unmount. If it's not mounted, it'll just fail and it doesn't care. It'll just fail instantly, which is fine. It'll wait for 1 second and then it'll mount. So your file system is mounted anyway. Then when the connection goes down, it'll unmount it, it'll sleep, and then it'll try mounting again, but SSHFS will fail instantly because there's no internet connection, so it doesn't really matter anyway. So this remount thing here just works fine for all the cases that I've been able to think of. But of course, if you've got your own custom setup, you might have to do some tinkering. But yeah, if you're just running a standard connection with no VPN, this is fine. If you are running a VPN, you'll want to copy your VPN's connection UUID into this case statement here, and that'll work fine. So I'll link this in the description for both cases if you just want to copy paste. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And lastly, because I know I'm going to get questions about this in the comments, yes, you can mount SSHFS with FSTAB, but in my opinion, there's not really much point, because at the point where FSTAB will try and mount your folder for you, NetworkManager will have already activated your connection, and so this is going to run anyway. So you'd essentially just be trying to mount it twice. So you can mount it with FSTAB if you want, but there's not really much point because Dispatcher is doing it for us anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I'll show you guys just an example of this script in action, like me disconnecting my thing and reconnecting, and so you can just see that it works. And that's pretty much it. Like, as long as you do that, it's all set up. I do want to say just real quickly, if it's failing to mount, you might want to be careful, because it could be that the identification key of your server has changed. Someone might be trying to middleman you, because SSHFS, if it's waiting, it'll, like, if you just run this command in your terminal and the key of your server is different, it'll be stuck at that whole do you want to keep connecting, or like add the fingerprint thing, like yes or no, and so it won't actually mount it because it'll just be waiting for input that it's never going to get. So if it's not mounting, try running this command manually and see if someone's trying to, middleman you, or if your IP address has changed or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. One last thing, if you are running this on a local network only and you don't care about remote IP addresses, you can change this one in here to be a local IP address and it'll still work fine. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll give you guys some examples of it in action, and we'll hop on over to the conclusion. Alright fellas, come have a gaze at my main display. You'll see I've got my file manager over here, and I've got my network manager, connections manager over here. I'm on Plasma, so this is the network manager Plasma tray. And down over here you can see I've got my remote file system mounted with all the stuff that I have on my server running up it. So I'll just show you the script in action so you can see how it works. So if I go ahead and just disconnect my VPN over here, you can see that it'll unmount my thing before trying to remount it, and it has come back up because I didn't deactivate my main connection. Now I go ahead and reconnect my VPN, and you can see it unmount and then remount. Simple as that. I can go ahead and have a look at all the stuff that's on my thing again. Now if I deactivate my actual connection, it'll bring down both my VPN and my real connection. So in this case, the script isn't going to be able to bring it back up, and you can see obviously the remount has failed because there's no internet connection. However, if I now go ahead and reconnect my wired connection, waits for my VPN to come up, and then my VPN will bring up my file system over here like that. So there you go, boys. Hosting your own cloud storage with SSHFS. It's private, it's secure, it's actually pretty quick. I get about 2.4 megabytes a second at my university to my home computer, obviously dependent on your network speeds. Also, you can see down here, I've got 1.4 terabytes free of cloud storage, which is pretty nice as well. So there you go. Us privacy-conscious Linux users no longer have to be jealous of people using Google Drive and OneDrive, because we have our own solution, arguably, in my opinion, a lot better. So there you go. Tell me, what are your thoughts, comments, questions? I'd love to hear about your own custom setup if you're running one. Let me know what you do with it, because this is cool stuff. It's cool stuff. So I'll see you boys in the next one.